Your sister just bought a lovely little home. When are you finally going to get your life together, Gabriella?" My mother's voice rang out across the dining room like a bell, announcing my inadequacy to everyone gathered around the Thanksgiving table. I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, watching the satisfied smirk spread across my sister Victoria's face. The turkey was perfectly golden, the cranberry sauce glistened in its crystal dish, and the judgment hung thick in the air of my parents' Nashville home. My name is Gabriella, and I had just turned 28 years old 3 weeks before that Thanksgiving dinner. For as long as I could remember, I had been the daughter who never quite measured up, the one who took the unconventional path, while my older sister Victoria walked the road my parents had paved with their expectations. She was 32, married to a man they adored, and now, apparently, the proud owner of a lovely little home that warranted public announcement and celebration. I set my fork down slowly, feeling the familiar weight of their disappointment pressing against my chest. Around the table sat my father George, my mother Patricia, my sister Victoria, her husband Jason, my Aunt Barbara, and my Uncle Thomas. Every single one of them was looking at me with varying degrees of pity, amusement, or in my mother's case, thinly veiled disgust. "Patricia, that's wonderful news about Victoria," my Aunt Barbara chimed in, deliberately not looking in my direction. "What neighborhood did they buy in?" "Oh, it's in Brentwood," my mother practically sang. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a beautiful backyard. Jason got promoted last month, so they were finally able to make it happen. The house appraised at $400,000. Can you believe it? The way she emphasized the price made my stomach turn. In my family, success was measured in dollars and square footage, in wedding rings and job titles that sounded impressive at dinner parties. My path as a freelance financial consultant who worked remotely and lived in what they assumed was a small rental apartment did not compute in their value system. "That's really impressive," Uncle Thomas said, raising his glass toward Victoria. "Starting to build real equity at your age is smart. Real smart." Victoria accepted the praise with practiced humility, though I could see the triumph gleaming in her eyes when she glanced my way. We had never been close, not really. Growing up, she had been the pretty one, the popular one, the one who knew exactly what to say to make our parents beam with pride. I had been the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who asked too many questions and never seemed satisfied with the answers everyone else accepted without thought. "Thank you, Uncle Thomas," Victoria said sweetly. "Jason and I worked really hard to save up for the down payment. It wasn't easy, but we made sacrifices." She let that word hang in the air. Sacrifices, as if it were a pointed commentary on my own lifestyle choices. I had heard variations of this speech my entire life. Victoria made sacrifices. Victoria did things the right way. Victoria understood the value of hard work and commitment. "Maybe you could give your sister some tips," my father George said, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment I had grown up hearing. "She's still renting that little place downtown, aren't you, Gabriella?" I opened my mouth to respond, but my mother cut me off with a wave of her hand. "George, let's not embarrass her on Thanksgiving," she said, somehow managing to embarrass me more with her attempt at mercy. "I'm sure Gabriella is doing the best she can with her little consulting thing. Not everyone is cut out for real careers." The words hit me like a slap, though I should have been used to them by now. My little consulting thing. As if the business I had built from nothing over the past 6 years was a hobby rather than a legitimate enterprise. As if the countless hours I had spent learning my craft, building my client base, and establishing my reputation meant nothing because I did not sit in a cubicle from 9 to 5 like a respectable person. I looked around the table at faces I had known my entire life, people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but who had spent decades making me feel like an afterthought. My mother Patricia, with her perfectly styled hair and designer dress, had always been more concerned with appearances than substance. My father George, successful in his own right as a regional sales manager, measured worth in titles and corner offices. And Victoria, Golden Victoria, had learned early that conformity was the price of their approval. But they did not know about the life I had been building in silence. They did not know about the clients who sought me out specifically because of my reputation. They did not know about the investments that had compounded over years of careful planning. They did not know that while they mocked me for renting, I had been quietly accumulating wealth in ways they could not imagine. I took a deep breath and smiled. The kind of smile I had perfected over years of family gatherings just like this one. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Not everyone is cut out for real careers, but some of us manage just fine anyway." The table fell silent for a moment, confusion flickering across my mother's face. She was not used to me responding with anything other than quiet acceptance or hasty retreat. But something had shifted in me over the past few months, a quiet confidence born from knowing exactly what I had accomplished. And this Thanksgiving, I was finally ready to show them. The dinner continued with Victoria, basking in the glow of our parents' approval, while I picked at my sweet potato casserole and thought about every moment that had led to this one. The pattern of dismissal and favoritism was not new. It had been woven into the fabric of my childhood like a thread I could never quite pull free. I remembered being 12 years old and bringing home a report card with straight A's, only to have my mother glance at it briefly before launching into a 20-minute conversation about Victoria's lead role in the school play. I remembered being 16 and winning a regional mathematics competition, then sitting in silence as my father spent dinner praising Victoria for making the cheerleading squad. I remembered being 22 and graduating with honors from college, my achievement overshadowed by Victoria's engagement announcement that same week. The message had always been clear. Victoria's accomplishments mattered. Mine were footnotes, afterthoughts, things to be acknowledged with a brief nod before returning attention to the main attraction. "So, Victoria?" my Aunt Barbara said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Tell us more about the house. What are your renovation plans?" Victoria launched into a detailed description of paint colors and landscaping ideas, while I let my mind drift back to a conversation I had overheard 3 years earlier. I had been visiting my parents for Christmas, and I had walked into the kitchen just in time to hear my mother on the phone with her sister. "I just don't know what we're going to do about Gabriella," she had said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "She refuses to get a real job, she doesn't seem interested in settling down, and she's living in some tiny apartment downtown like a college student. Victoria is doing everything right, and Gabriella is just drifting. I'm honestly embarrassed to talk about her at book club." Embarrassed. My own mother was embarrassed by me. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because my life did not fit the mold she had constructed in her mind. I did not have a husband or a house in the suburbs. I did not work for a company with a recognizable name. I did not produce the grandchildren she could show off to her friends. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that my tiny apartment downtown had been a strategic choice, while I poured every extra dollar into building my business and my investment portfolio. What she did not know was that I had been turning down 6-figure corporate job offers because I made more working for myself with clients who actually valued my expertise. What she did not know was that I had been quietly outpacing Victoria's financial trajectory for years, all while they pitied me for my supposed failures. "The backyard is what really sold us," Victoria was saying. "It's perfect for when we start a family." My mother practically glowed at the mention of potential grandchildren. "Oh, I can't wait! You two are going to give me the most beautiful grandbabies." She did not look at me. She had stopped asking me about my relationship status years ago, having apparently decided that my prospects in that department were as disappointing as everything else about me. "Speaking of settling down," my father said, finally turning his attention my way. "Are you still seeing that guy? What was his name? The one who worked at the coffee shop?" The question was designed to diminish me, and everyone at the table knew it. He was referring to Marcus, a man I had dated briefly 2 years ago, who happened to work as a barista while finishing his doctorate in economics. My father had fixated on the barista part and conveniently ignored the doctoral candidate part, using Marcus as further evidence of my poor judgment. No, Dad. Marcus and I broke up a long time ago. He's actually a professor now at Vanderbilt. Oh, my father said, clearly uninterested. Well, that's nice for him. The dismissal stung more than it should have. After nearly 3 decades of this treatment, I should have developed immunity. But there was something about being reduced to nothing in front of your entire family that never quite stopped hurting. You know, Gabriella, Jason said, speaking up for the first time since we had sat down. Victoria and I could probably help you find a real job if you're struggling. My company is always looking for administrative assistants. Administrative assistants. I held an advanced degree in finance and ran a consulting business that served clients across 6 states, and my sister's husband was offering me a position answering phones. That's very kind of you, Jason, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I'll keep that in mind. Victoria smiled at her husband adoringly, as if he had just offered me the keys to the kingdom instead of an entry-level position that would pay less than I made in a single week. You really should consider it, Victoria added. Stability is important, Gabby. You can't just keep floating through life hoping things work out. Floating through life. Is that what they thought I was doing? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but I knew laughter would only confirm their suspicions that I was not taking my situation seriously enough. I appreciate the concern, I said, but I'm actually doing quite well. My mother sighed heavily, the sound of a woman who had given up on a lost cause. Oh, Gabriella, you always say that, but actions speak louder than words. Victoria has a home now, a real asset. What do you have to show for yourself? The question hung in the air, sharp and cold. What did I have to show for myself? If only she knew. If only any of them knew what I had been building while they spent years underestimating me. I looked at my mother, at my father, at Victoria and her husband, at my aunt and uncle who watched the exchange with expressions of mild pity. They had already decided who I was and what I was worth. Nothing I said would change their minds. But showing them, that was a different matter entirely. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I remained lost in thought, replaying the dozens of similar moments that had punctuated my life. Every birthday, where my gifts were afterthoughts. Every holiday where my accomplishments were ignored. Every phone call where my mother launched immediately into updates about Victoria without asking how I was doing. I thought about the previous Christmas, when I had mentioned that one of my clients had referred 3 new businesses my way. My mother had responded by asking if I had considered getting a real job with benefits. I thought about my 27th birthday, when I had shared that I was on track to reach a significant financial milestone. My father had changed the subject to talk about Jason's promotion. The dismissals had become so routine that I had stopped sharing good news entirely. What was the point? They had decided who I was when I was still a child, and nothing I did would ever change their perception. I was Gabriella, the difficult one, the one who did not fit in, the one who would never measure up to Victoria's shining example. More turkey, dear? My Aunt Barbara asked, holding out the platter. I shook my head and watched as the family continued their celebration of Victoria's success. My sister was describing the closing process with animated enthusiasm, her husband nodding along proudly. We almost didn't get the house, Victoria said, her voice tinged with drama. There was another offer, and we had to go above asking price. But Jason handled everything so perfectly. That's my boy, my father said, beaming at Jason like a proud parent, which was particularly galling considering he had never once looked at me that way. I thought about the day, 7 months earlier, when I had signed the closing documents on my own property. There had been no fanfare, no family celebration, no proud announcements at dinner, just me, my lawyer, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had done something most people twice my age would never accomplish. The condo had been listed at $900,000. I had paid cash, the the culmination of 6 years of strategic saving, smart investing, and building a business that generated income whether I was actively working or not. While my family assumed I was barely scraping by in my rental apartment, I had been accumulating wealth at a pace that would have stunned them if they had bothered to pay attention. But they never bothered. That was the problem. "You know what the best part is?" Victoria said, leaning back in her chair with satisfaction. "We're building equity every month. That's what homeownership is all about. Right, Daddy?" My father nodded sagely. "Smart money moves. That's what it's all about. Every payment you make is investing in your future." He did not look at me, but the message was clear. Victoria was making smart money moves. I was not. "Gabriella," my mother said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. "Maybe next year you'll have some good news to share too. It's never too late to turn things around." Turn things around. As if my life was a sinking ship that needed to be righted. I felt the anger rising in my chest, the same anger I had been suppressing for years. But alongside it was something new. A calm certainty that I did not have to keep playing this role. I did not have to keep accepting their narrative about who I was and what I had accomplished. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "I do have some news." The table fell quiet. My mother looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. Victoria tilted her head, clearly expecting to hear something she could dismiss. "Oh?" my father said. "What's that?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. For years, I had kept my successes private, partly because I was tired of having them minimized, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself that I did not need their validation to feel proud of what I had built. But there was also something deeply satisfying about the idea of finally showing them the truth, not for their approval. I had stopped seeking that years ago, but because they had spent so long painting a picture of me that was completely false, and it was time to correct the record. "You know what?" I said, pushing back from the table slightly. "Let me show you something." "Show us what?" Victoria asked, exchanging a confused look with Jason. I pulled out my phone and navigated to my photo gallery. Over the past 7 months, I had documented everything about my new home. The closing documents, the keys, the empty rooms waiting to be filled, the sweeping views of the Nashville skyline from my floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mom, does this television have screen mirroring?" I asked, gesturing toward the large flat screen mounted on the wall of the dining room. "Yes. But why would you—" she started. "I want to share something with the family," I said, my voice steady. "Since we're celebrating Victoria's lovely little home, I thought it might be a good time to share my own news." The confusion around the table was palpable. My Aunt Barbara and Uncle Thomas exchanged uncertain glances. Victoria's smile had become fixed, uncertain. My parents looked at each other, clearly not sure what to make of this unexpected turn. "Gabriella, this is Victoria's moment," my mother said, her voice carrying a warning note. "Let's not make this about you." I smiled at her, genuinely smiled, because she had spent my entire life telling me not to make things about myself. Do not outshine your sister. Do not make waves. Do not expect attention or praise. "Mom, I've been keeping quiet about my own accomplishments for years because this family never seemed interested. But you asked what I have to show for myself, and I think it's only fair that I answer that question honestly." And I stood up from the table, phone in hand, and walked toward the television. Behind me, I could hear my sister whispering something to Jason, my mother sighing heavily, my father clearing his throat with obvious disapproval. They thought I was about to embarrass myself. They thought I was about to prove once and for all that I had nothing to compare to Victoria's achievement. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. I connected my phone to the television with hands that were remarkably steady. Years of being underestimated had prepared me for this moment, though I had not known until now that I would actually seize it. My mother stood up from her chair, her expression a mixture of irritation and concern. "Gabriella, really, this isn't necessary. Why don't you sit back down and we can finish dinner like civilized people?" "It'll just take a moment, Mom," I said, scrolling through my photos to find the right folder. Victoria crossed her arms, her earlier triumph replaced by something closer to annoyance. "Let her do whatever she wants to do. I'm sure it won't take long." The condescension in her voice was so familiar it barely registered anymore. I had been hearing some variation of that tone for my entire life. Let Gabriella have her little moment. It won't amount to anything. "You know what, Victoria?" my mother said, turning to my sister with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry about this. You know how your sister can be. How I could be. As if I was the unreasonable one for wanting, just once, to share something positive about my life without being dismissed or ignored." My father remained seated, his expression one of patient long-suffering. "Let's just get this over with," he said. "What do you want to show us, Gabriella? Another one of your client testimonials?" The mockery in his voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Last year, I had tried to explain that my business had received several prestigious referrals, and he had laughed and asked if I was still sending out resumes. He did not understand what I did, and more importantly, he did not want to understand. Understanding would require him to revise his opinion of me, and that was too much work. "Not testimonials," I said. "Something a bit more tangible." The television screen flickered to life, displaying my phone's photo gallery. I selected the folder labeled New Home and turned to face my family. 7 months ago, I said, my voice calm and clear. I closed on a property. I didn't tell anyone in this family because, frankly, I was tired of having my accomplishments minimized. But since we're sharing real estate news tonight, I thought I'd contribute. I pressed play on the first video, a walkthrough tour I had recorded the day I received the keys. The screen filled with images of a stunning modern condo, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Nashville, hardwood floors gleaming under recessed lighting. The room went completely silent. The video continued, panning through a spacious open-concept living area, a gourmet kitchen with high-end appliances, a master suite larger than Victoria's entire upstairs. I watched my family's faces as the footage played, saw the confusion giving way to shock. What is this?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my home," I said simply. "My condo, to be specific. 23rd floor, 2,800 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms. I paid cash." Victoria's face had gone pale. Her husband Jason was staring at the screen with his mouth slightly open. My father had gone completely still, his expression unreadable. "Paid cash?" my Aunt Barbara echoed. "But that must have cost $920,000, I said, plus closing costs. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. I watched it land on each face around the table, saw the calculations happening behind their eyes. Victoria's lovely little home, the one they had been celebrating, was worth $400,000. Mine was worth more than double that. "That's not possible," Victoria said, her voice tight. "You work from home. You do consulting. There's no way you could afford something like that." I turned to face my sister directly. For years I had accepted her dismissals, let her talk over me, allowed her to diminish my accomplishments. But something had broken loose inside me, and I was not going to play that role anymore. That's the interesting thing about assumptions, Victoria. Sometimes they're wrong. I've been building my business for 6 years. I have clients who pay me very well for my expertise, and unlike some people, I invested my money instead of spending it on designer clothes and expensive vacations. Victoria's face flushed red. She was not used to me fighting back, not used to anyone in this family acknowledging that perhaps her path was not the only valid one. "Now hold on," my father said, finally finding his voice. "This doesn't make any sense. You've been renting that little apartment downtown. You've been struggling. I've been renting a small apartment because it made financial sense while I was accumulating capital, I explained, keeping my voice level. I never said I was struggling. You all just assumed I was, because that's what you wanted to believe. My mother was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to wake herself from a dream. But why wouldn't you tell us? Why would you keep something like this secret? I laughed, genuinely laughed, at the absurdity of the question. Why would I tell you? So you could minimize it like you minimize everything else I accomplish. So you could find some way to make it less impressive than whatever Victoria was doing. I stopped sharing good news with this family years ago, because it was never received as good news. It was always met with skepticism or dismissal or a quick change of subject to talk about Victoria instead. The words came out with more heat than I had intended, but I did not take them back. They were true, and it felt liberating to finally say them out loud. That's not fair, Victoria said, her voice rising. We've always been supportive. Supportive? I turned to her, incredulous. Victoria, 2 years ago I told you I had landed my biggest client ever, a contract that was going to change my career trajectory. Do you remember what you said? She stared at me, silent. You said, "That's nice. Anyway, have you thought about settling down? You're not getting any younger." You didn't ask a single question about my work. You changed the subject to tell me I needed to find a husband. I was just trying to help, Victoria protested. No, you were trying to put me back in my place. The same place this family has always tried to keep me. The underachiever. The disappointment. The one who can't quite get her act together. I paused, letting the words sink in. Well, I got my act together. I just didn't tell any of you about it because I knew you wouldn't believe me anyway. The video had finished playing, and the television screen now showed a still image of the Nashville skyline at sunset, captured from my living room windows. No one was looking at it anymore. They were all looking at me, with expressions ranging from disbelief to something that might have been the beginning of shame. My mother was the first to speak, her voice uncharacteristically small. Gabriella, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said. You never asked. In all these years, you've never once asked me about my work in a way that suggested you actually wanted to know. You've asked if I'm still doing that consulting thing. You've asked if I've thought about getting a real job, but you've never asked what I actually do, who my clients are, what I've accomplished. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For once, she did not have a ready dismissal. Let me tell you what I actually do, I continued. I provide financial strategy consulting to medium-sized businesses across Tennessee and neighboring states. I help companies optimize their cash flow, reduce unnecessary expenses, and plan for long-term growth. My clients include manufacturing firms, healthcare organizations, and professional service companies. I charge premium rates because I deliver premium results. Last year I earned more than Dad makes at his sales job, and I did it working from my little apartment in my pajamas. My father's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, disbelief, something that might have been wounded pride. That's quite an accomplishment, he finally managed. It is, I agreed. And I did it without any support or encouragement from this family. I did it while being constantly compared to Victoria and found wanting. I did it while hearing over and over again that I needed to get my life together, settle down, find a real job. I walked back to my seat at the table but did not sit down. Instead, I looked at each person in turn, letting them feel the weight of what I was saying. Do you know what it's like to achieve something meaningful and have no one to celebrate with? To know that if you share your success with your own family, it will be met with skepticism or indifference. I stopped telling you about the good things in my life because it hurt too much to have them dismissed. Victoria was staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Her husband Jason looked deeply uncomfortable, perhaps remembering his offer to help me find a position as an administrative assistant. "When I bought my condo 7 months ago," I said, "I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew exactly how this family would react. You would find some way to diminish it, to compare it unfavorably to something Victoria had done, to suggest that I had made a mistake, or gotten lucky, or somehow cheated." "We wouldn't have done that," my mother protested weakly. "Really? Because not 20 minutes ago you asked me when I was going to get my life together. You praised Victoria's $400,000 house while assuming I was still renting because I couldn't afford anything better. You've spent my entire life making it clear that my achievements don't measure up, so why would I expect this one to be any different?" The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with years of accumulated grievances that were finally being acknowledged. My Aunt Barbara, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, cleared her throat. "Gabriella, I have to admit I had no idea about any of this. Your mother always gave the impression that you were struggling." "I know what impression my mother gave," I said, turning to face her. "She gave that impression because it fit the narrative she preferred. The narrative where Victoria was the success story and I was the cautionary tale." My mother flinched as if she had been struck. "That's not true. I love both my daughters equally." "Maybe you do," I said, "but you certainly haven't treated us equally. Victoria gets celebrated for buying a home that costs less than half what mine did. I get asked when I'm going to get my life together. Victoria gets sympathy when things are hard and praise when things go well. I get dismissed regardless of what I accomplish." "Gabby, you're being dramatic," Victoria said, finding her voice again. "This isn't some kind of competition." "You're right, it's not," I agreed. "Because there's no competition when one person's achievements are always valued more than the others. There's no competition when the game is rigged from the start." I finally sat back down in my chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the revelation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a hollow feeling. "I'm not showing you my home to prove that I'm better than Victoria," I said quietly. "I'm showing you because you asked what I had to show for myself, and I'm tired of lying by omission. I'm tired of letting you believe I'm a failure when I'm not. I'm tired of pretending that your opinion of me doesn't hurt when it does." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then my father cleared his throat. "Gabriella, I owe you an apology." I looked at him surprised. My father was not a man who apologized easily or often. "I've been dismissive of your choices," he continued, his voice gruff with discomfort. "I didn't understand what you were doing, so I assumed you weren't doing anything important. That was wrong of me." It was not a complete acknowledgement of everything he had done, all the years of disappointment and comparison. But it was something. More than I had expected, honestly. "Thank you, Dad," I said. My mother, however, seemed to be having a harder time processing the situation. She kept looking at the television, at the image of my condo, as if trying to reconcile it with everything she believed about me. "I just don't understand," she said finally. "How could you afford something like that? You never went to business school. You never had a real corporate job. It doesn't make sense." "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You've never been able to see past your own definition of success. Business school isn't the only path to financial achievement. Corporate jobs aren't the only way to build wealth. I found my own way, and it worked." I could see her struggling with this, trying to fit my accomplishments into her worldview and failing. It would have been sad if it were not so frustrating. "But Victoria worked so hard," she said, almost plaintively. "She went to college, she got married, she did everything right." "And so did I said. "I just did it differently." The Thanksgiving dinner had effectively ended, though no one had officially called it. The plates sat half empty, the food growing cold, as my family grappled with the revelation that had upended their understanding of our family dynamics. Victoria had been unusually quiet since my disclosure. Her earlier triumph completely evaporated. I watched her from across the table, saw the way she kept glancing at her husband and then away, as if searching for something to anchor her in this new reality. "I think I need some air," Victoria said finally, pushing back from the table. "Jason, come with me." She practically fled the room, her husband trailing behind her. I heard the back door open and close, and I imagined them standing on my parents' patio, trying to process what had just happened. My mother turned to me, her expression complicated. "You've really upset your sister, you know." "I've upset her?" I could not keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Mom, I didn't do anything except answer your question about what I have to show for myself. Should I have lied? Should I have let you all continue believing I was struggling?" "No, but you didn't have to do it like this. During Thanksgiving, in front of everyone." "You mean the same way you chose Thanksgiving, in front of everyone, to announce Victoria's house and ask when I was going to get my life together? That timing was acceptable, but mine isn't." My mother pressed her lips together, clearly recognizing the trap she had walked into. "I just think," she said slowly, "that there was a kinder way to handle this. A kinder way." I let the words hang in the air. "Mom, I have spent my entire adult life being kind, being quiet, accepting criticism without complaint, watching Victoria get praised while I got overlooked. And where did it get me? You still thought I was a failure. You still pitied me. You still used me as a cautionary tale for what happens when someone doesn't follow the expected path." My Aunt Barbara and Uncle Thomas had been watching the exchange with expressions of increasing discomfort. Finally, my aunt spoke up. "Gabriella, for what it's worth, I think what you've accomplished is remarkable. I wish you had felt comfortable sharing it with us sooner." "Thank you, Aunt Barbara. I wish I had too." The back door opened again, and Victoria returned to the dining room. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying, and her husband hovered behind her protectively. "I need to say something," Victoria announced, her voice unsteady. "I owe you an apology, Gabby." I blinked, genuinely surprised. Of all the reactions I had anticipated, an apology from Victoria had not been among them. "I've been horrible to you," she continued. "I always knew I was Mom and Dad's favorite, and instead of trying to change that or stand up for you, I just used it. I used it to feel better about myself. Every time I put you down, every time I acted like I was better than you, it was because I was insecure about my own choices." She took a shaky breath. "The truth is, I've always been a little jealous of you. You didn't need anyone's approval. You just did your own thing, even when everyone criticized you for it. I could never do that. I was always too scared of what people would think." I stared at my sister, trying to reconcile this version of her with the one I had known my entire life. Victoria, jealous of me? It seemed impossible. "When I bought this house," she continued, "I was so excited to finally have something that felt like a real accomplishment, something I could point to and say, 'I did this.' But the whole time, I was terrified that it wasn't enough, that you would somehow outshine me, the way you always seemed to in my head even if no one else saw it. Victoria, I never wanted to outshine you," I said, my anger softening slightly. "I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to not always be the disappointment." "You were never a disappointment," she said, tears starting to fall again. "I mean, you were to Mom and Dad, but that was their failure, not yours. And I made it worse by playing along with their narrative instead of defending you." For a moment, we just looked at each other across the ruins of our family's Thanksgiving dinner. So many years of competition and comparison, so much resentment built up on both sides. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Victoria said. "I wouldn't forgive me either. But I wanted you to know that I see what I did wrong, and I'm sorry." It was more than I had ever expected to hear from her. Not enough to erase years of hurt, but a start. A crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. "Thank you, Victoria," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." My mother watched this exchange with an expression of deep discomfort. She had spent decades pitting us against each other, praising Victoria to put me in my place, using comparison as a parenting tool. Watching us begin to break free of that dynamic clearly unsettled her. "I think everyone is being very dramatic about this," she said, her voice tight. "I never meant to make anyone feel bad. I was just trying to encourage both of you to do your best." "Encourage?" I turned to face her. "Mom, there's a difference between encouragement and constant criticism. There's a difference between pushing someone to succeed and making them feel like a failure no matter what they accomplish." "That's not fair," she protested. "Everything I did was out of love." "I believe you believe that," I said. "But love isn't just about intention. It's about impact. And the impact of your parenting was that I spent most of my adult life feeling inadequate, no matter how much I achieved." My father, who had been silent through Victoria's apology, finally spoke up. "Patricia, I think the girls have a point. We may have been too hard on Gabriella." My mother looked at him, betrayal flashing across her face. "George, you can't be serious. We were just trying to help her." "Were we?" he asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like she did pretty well without our help. Maybe better than she would have done if we'd gotten in her way." It was the closest thing to acknowledgement I was likely to get from my father. I took it for what it was worth. "I'm not asking for apologies or explanations," I said, standing up from the table. "I just wanted you to know the truth. I'm not struggling. I'm not a failure. And I'm done pretending to be one so that Victoria can feel successful by comparison." I gathered my purse and phone, aware of every eye in the room following my movements. "I think I'm going to head home," I said. "It's been a long evening." The drive back to my condo took about 40 minutes, and I spent most of it in a daze, replaying the evening's events in my mind. The look on my mother's face when she saw my home, Victoria's unexpected apology, my father's grudging acknowledgement. It had all happened so fast, and yet each moment felt burned into my memory. By the time I pulled into the parking garage of my building, the sky had gone fully dark. The attendant waved me through with a familiar smile, and I navigated to my assigned spot, my hands still slightly shaky on the steering wheel. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor was quiet. Just me and the soft hum of machinery carrying me upward. When the doors opened onto my floor, I stood there for a moment, just looking at my front door. My home. The tangible proof of everything I had built. Inside, the city lights sparkled through my floor-to-ceiling windows. I did not turn on any lamps, just stood in the darkness and watched Nashville pulse with life below me. Somewhere out there, people were having Thanksgiving dinners that did not end in revelations and recriminations. Somewhere out there, families were celebrating together without decades of dysfunction simmering beneath the surface. I thought about my mother, probably still sitting at her dining room table, trying to process what had happened. She had built her identity around being the mother of 2 daughters, one successful and one struggling. Tonight, that narrative had been shattered, and I knew she would not forgive me easily for it. But that was her problem, not mine. I had spent too many years making her feelings my responsibility, contorting myself into whatever shape might earn her approval. I was done with that. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my friend Diana, my college roommate and one of the few people who had known about my condo purchase from the beginning. "How did the dinner go?" she asked. I smiled despite everything and typed back, "Better than expected. I finally told them about the condo." "You did what? Tell me everything." Instead of typing out the long story, I called her. Diana answered on the first ring, her voice bubbling with curiosity. "I cannot believe you finally did it. she said. "I've been telling you for years that you should tell them." "I know. I just wasn't ready until tonight. My mom made some comment about Victoria's new house and asked when I was going to get my life together, and something just snapped." "Good," Diana said firmly. "It was about time something snapped. You've let them walk all over you for way too long." Diana had witnessed the family dynamics firsthand during our college years. She had been there when my parents showed up for Victoria's graduation but not mine, claiming they could not get time off work. She had been there when my mother called to tell me about Victoria's engagement, spending 45 minutes discussing wedding plans before asking how my finals had gone. "The best part was Victoria's face," I said, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. She had been so smug about her $400,000 house, and then she saw mine. "I bet she nearly passed out," Diana laughed. "All those years of lording her success over you, and it turns out you were doing better than her the whole time." "She actually apologized," I said, which I didn't expect. She said she was jealous of me because I didn't need anyone's approval. Diana was quiet for a moment. "Wow, that's actually pretty mature of her." "I know. I'm not sure what to do with it, honestly. She's been terrible to me for so long, but the apology seemed genuine." "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Diana said. "Just because she apologized doesn't mean you have to forgive her immediately. You get to take whatever time you need." We talked for another hour, dissecting every moment of the evening. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter somehow. Telling the truth had lifted a weight I had not even realized I was carrying. I made myself a cup of tea and settled onto my couch, looking out at the city lights. This condo, this life I had built, it was mine. Not something I had earned through my parents' approval or my sister's validation. Something I had created through my own hard work and determination. For years I had wondered if I would ever feel like enough. If I would ever stop hearing my mother's voice in my head, criticizing my choices and comparing me unfavorably to Victoria. Tonight, for the first time, I felt like maybe I was starting to silence that voice. Not because of the money or the square footage or the impressive closing price, but because I had finally stopped hiding. I had stopped protecting my family from the truth about my success, and I had stopped protecting myself from their potential rejection. Whatever happened next with my family, I knew I could handle it. I had built a life that made me proud, and I was not going to let anyone make me feel ashamed of it. The days following Thanksgiving were strangely quiet. My mother did not call, which was unusual because she typically reached out the day after family gatherings to analyze every moment and share her opinions on everyone's behavior. The silence felt heavy with meaning. Victoria texted me 3 days later, a simple message that said, "Can we get lunch sometime? Just the two of us?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect myself from another round of competition or comparison. But another part remembered the tears in her eyes when she apologized, the vulnerability in her voice. "Sure," I typed back. "Name the place." We met at a quiet restaurant in the Gulch neighborhood the following Saturday. Victoria was already there when I arrived, fidgeting with her napkin like a nervous teenager. It struck me how rarely I had seen her uncertain. Throughout our lives, she had always been the confident one, the one who knew exactly what to say and how to say it. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "Thanks for asking." We ordered drinks and made small talk about the weather and traffic, dancing around the obvious topic. Finally, Victoria set down her water glass and looked at me directly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at Thanksgiving," she admitted, "about how you stopped sharing good news because we always dismissed it. I went back and thought about specific examples, and you're right. I was horrible." Victoria. "No, let me finish. I need to say this." She took a deep breath. "I remembered your 27th birthday. You told me about that financial milestone you'd reached, and I changed the subject to talk about my kitchen renovation. I didn't even congratulate you. And I remembered when you landed that big client, and I asked about your love life instead of your work. It's like I was programmed to minimize anything good that happened to you. Programmed by who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mom, mostly. She always made it clear that your achievements were threatening somehow. Like there was only so much success to go around, and if you had some, there would be less for me. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but that's what I internalized. It doesn't sound crazy, I said. It sounds like our childhood. Victoria laughed, though there was no humor in it. I'm 32 years old, and I'm just now realizing how messed up our family dynamics are. That's pretty pathetic. It's not pathetic. It's hard to see clearly when you're inside something. We talked for nearly 3 hours, longer than we had talked in years. Victoria told me about her own insecurities, about how she had married Jason partly because he fit our parents' expectations, about how exhausted she was from constantly performing the role of the successful daughter. The house was supposed to make me feel like I had finally arrived, she confessed. Like I had checked all the boxes and now I could relax. But I don't feel relaxed. I feel trapped. By what? By the expectation that there's always another box to check, another milestone to reach. I look at you, and you just live your life. You don't seem to care what anyone thinks. I care, I said. I cared so much that I hid my success for 7 months. But I'm trying to stop caring so much. It's a work in progress. We parted with plans to see each other again, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like maybe I was gaining a sister rather than losing a competitor. The situation with my parents was more complicated. My father sent me an email 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, apologizing for years of dismissing my career and asking if I would consider having dinner with him alone, without my mother. I agreed, and we met at a steakhouse near his office. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he told me over our appetizers. Your mother and we had certain ideas about what success looks like. College, corporate job, marriage, house, kids, that checklist. When you didn't follow it, we didn't know how to evaluate your choices. So you assumed the worst, I said. We assumed what was familiar. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. My mother remained conspicuously silent. Victoria told me she had been moping around the house, complaining that I had ruined Thanksgiving and embarrassed the family. Apparently, she had also been calling extended family members to share her version of events, painting me as ungrateful and show-offy. But something interesting had happened. Many of those family members had started reaching out to congratulate me. Aunt Barbara called to say she was proud of me. Cousins I had not spoken to in years sent messages of support. My mother's attempt to control the narrative had backfired, and the family was seeing her behavior for what it was. Sometimes, I realized, the best revenge is simply telling the truth and letting other people draw their own conclusions. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, my life had transformed in ways I never expected. Victoria and I talked weekly now, genuinely talked, about our lives and struggles and hopes. She had started therapy to work through the damage our upbringing had caused, and Jason had been surprisingly supportive of her journey. My father and I had developed something approaching a real relationship. He asked about my work with genuine interest, shared articles he thought might be relevant to my business, and stopped comparing me to Victoria entirely. It was not perfect, but it was progress. My mother remained distant, unable or unwilling to acknowledge her role in the family dysfunction. We spoke occasionally, surface-level conversations about weather and schedules, but the warmth I had always craved from her remained absent. I had made peace with the fact that she might never change. Her approval was no longer the prize I had spent my life chasing. The condo that had started this transformation had become my sanctuary. I had decorated it exactly to my taste, with no input from family members or concern about whether they would approve. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every decorative detail reflected my own preferences rather than someone else's expectations. I thought often about the years I had spent in silence, hiding my success to avoid conflict. All that time wasted, pretending to be less than I was. The family I had tried so hard to please had not even seen the real me, and that was as much my fault as theirs. I had been so focused on protecting myself from their criticism that I had never given them the chance to truly know me. Now, for better or worse, they knew. They knew about my business, my home, my financial success. More importantly, they knew that I was no longer willing to shrink myself to fit their limited expectations. My mother, I learned through Victoria, continued to struggle with the shift in family dynamics. She complained frequently about feeling left out, about Victoria spending too much time with me, about family gatherings feeling different now that the old hierarchy had been disrupted. Victoria told me that our mother had recently described me as difficult to a friend at her bridge club, apparently unable to find a new narrative to replace the old one. The consequences of her years of favoritism were becoming increasingly clear. Victoria, emboldened by her own therapy, had started pushing back against our mother's attempts at manipulation. My father, perhaps seeing the situation clearly for the first time, had reduced his automatic defense of her behavior. Extended family members who had previously accepted her version of events were now questioning her credibility. She had built a house of cards based on the premise that Victoria was the successful daughter and I was the disappointment. When that premise collapsed, so did her ability to control the family story. The isolation she now experienced was not punishment I had sought. It was simply the natural result of decades of dishonesty catching up to her. I had lunch with Diana to update her on everything that had happened since Thanksgiving. We sat at a cafe near my condo, enjoying the warm spring weather. "So your mom is basically in exile of her own making," Diana summarized. "And Victoria is in therapy. Your dad is being reasonable and you're thriving. That's quite a turnaround." "It doesn't feel quite real yet," I admitted. For so long I assumed this dynamic would never change. Now it's changing, and I'm not sure what to do with myself. "Do what you've always done," Diana said. "Build your life. Grow your business. Be happy. The only difference is that now you can do it openly instead of in secret." She was right, of course. The fundamental truth of my life had not changed. I was still the same person who had built a successful business and bought a beautiful home. The only difference was that now my family knew about it. I walked home from lunch, taking the long route through the city I loved. Nashville had been good to me, had provided the backdrop for my greatest achievements. The condo waiting for me on the 23rd floor was proof of what I could accomplish when I trusted myself, instead of seeking validation from people who were never going to give it. Standing at my windows that evening, watching the sun set over the city, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Years of feeling invisible, of having my accomplishments overlooked, of being the family disappointment. And then one Thanksgiving dinner, where I finally stopped hiding and let them see who I really was. I had not set out for revenge. I had simply wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to stop pretending I was less than I was. But the truth had done what anger never could. It had shifted the balance, exposed the dysfunction, and given everyone the chance to choose a different path forward. Some had taken that chance. Others had not. But that was their choice, not mine. I was done managing other people's feelings about my success. I was done shrinking to make them comfortable. I was Gabriella, and I had built a life I was proud of. And that was enough. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that Thanksgiving revelation to the transformed relationships that followed, I realized that the best revenge was not about winning or proving them wrong. It was about finally being free to live my life openly, without apology, without hiding, without the weight of their disappointment pressing down on me. I was finally, completely, myself.